Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Plotlines. I'm your host, Connor. And before we start our episode today, please like, share, comment, and subscribe. I hope everyone is having a lovely Christmas time. We are recording this prior to Christmas, but this will be out sometime after Christmas. And today we're going to be talking about the old world, specifically England and Wales. There was a recent census taken, and it showed a massive decrease in uh, pe- uh, citizens considering themselves Christian, and sort of how. And we're going to talk about how that affects the culture and what the culture of England and Wales really is at the moment. And here to discuss that with me and to give me better insight into into England is Peter from Bonday Radio. Welcome, Peter.
Thanks very much, Connor. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm always happy to discuss the affairs of England at this time, and very much feeling in the festive spirit at the moment.
Yeah, it might be a little bit of ironic given our topic too. It's a somewhat of a disheartening topic to have, but I think we can look at it as as in some ways an optimistic. I think we can be optimistic that we don't really know what has in store for England and for all of Christendom, and maybe there's a way out of this tough situation we've got ourselves into.
The
I'm
way of the
going
cross.
exactly. There nobody said this life was going to be easy.
Yep.
Um, I'm going to share the what is it the I'm going to share the article, the data, so everyone can see. What's that? Yep. Okay. So we have, I think the best thing to look at is just this graphic, the differences between uh, the years when we have the 2011 census versus the uh, 2021 census. Is that a normal? Is it usually 10 years? Every 10 years, is that usually the census taken?
Yes, that's right, Connor. And I think one thing that should be immediately obvious is that we have just received the data, the full data and information from this census in the last month, despite it being run last year. It does not usually take this long for us to receive the information. So, one little caveat that I would emphasize that our listeners bear in mind is that these national censuses are um, they are manipulated to a certain degree by the power structure, and they are, part of their, field of information warfare against the general public. So the very fact that we had to wait so long, and then the data itself was sort of drip fed to the public, I think bespeaks the kind of agendas that lie behind the revelation of this information. And I wouldn't also say that all of it is completely accurate. We can get onto those parts that I'm perhaps most skeptical about. But nevertheless, I think it's still very useful and important information. It's a very seminal moment, and of course, the most important headline of all is the two bars that you see, second from the top there, with the percentage of the population that claim to adhere to Christianity, and the shocking result that we have here is that this is the census that will be remembered as the one in which Christianity became a minority religion in England and Wales. I almost can't believe that I'm saying those words, actually. That, I was speaking about this to my father the other day, that we are now in a Christian minority country. I mean, Christianity is a confessional religion. And so, as heretical and watered down as people's, faith or Christian, at least Christian identity might have been, nevertheless, to tell, a state official that they confess some kind of friendship with God, according to the revelation of our Lord Jesus Christ. That was the majority of the population, almost 60% of the population, just back in 2011. And for that to plummet to 46.2% at this period is deeply harrowing, to be quite honest. And deeply ominous as well, because that rate of decline looks set to continue. In fact, it might even accelerate, because as we can get into other parts of the census, basically what you've got is the indigenous English population is very much aging, is rapidly aging, and when that baby boomer bulge starts really dying in large numbers, those no religions and those other pagan religions will really increase, and the Christianity will drop off even further.
Word from our affiliate, Bishop Sheen Rosaries. You've probably worn through the chain of your cheap plastic rosary. Other rosaries simply can't stand up to the wear and tear of everyday life. Bishop Sheen rosaries are made of solid metal beads and paracord to withstand any condition, and are backed with a lifetime warranty. Upgrade your rosary to a Bishop Sheen rosary made to fit your lifestyle, or buy one for a friend. Each rosary sold supplies 2 weeks of food for a school kid in Uganda. You use the exclusive link down below to help support our efforts here at Plotlines. The link will take you to sheenrosaries.com. Be sure to use the code Plotlines10. Yeah. It seems to me also a big component probably of this is, I would assume that Gen Z is probably more prone to say that they don't have a religion. They might also probably put as much focus into religion as many other generations do too, but they're more willing to say, yeah, no, I'm not religious.
Yeah, which of course is false, because man is a social and religious animal. So the question really, I think, one of the major questions for current Catholic commentators, scholars, philosophers, historians, and a question that I've been grappling with recently with regard to some of my own writing is, what is the majority religion of the secularized West, the apostatized West today? And I think if we were talking about the period between, roughly speaking, the early 19th century and then until about 1968, the answer I would have given would have been nationalism.
Yeah.
As a political religion. But since then, I'm not so sure about what the answer is, and I've been struggling to put my finger on it. I thought before COVID that it was basically a kind of secular hedonism, where it was just about satisfaction of the appetites. But during that period of hysteria, it was quite eye-opening to see the fact that people were willing to accept great restrictions on their ability to satisfy their appetites. They managed to close down the Great British Pub for 2 years. That would have caused a riot even back in the 90s or something. But now people are willing to comply and order in their Deliveroo and watch their Netflix. And so people were willing to undergo serious privations. They weren't able to go out and go to nightclubs and fornicate and the things that I thought were the things that people lived for. Um, so that was very revelatory. What I saw, and I'm sure other viewers picked up on as well, was that uh, people were willing to forego that people's willingness to forego um, uh, these material provisions, these material desires, um, was a form of sacrifice, which is the action at the heart of religion. So that tells you that we're dealing with a religious reality here. Furthermore, religion stands behind the warrant for obedience that the secular power is able to proclaim or to justify its own authority. And so, why were people able to? Why did people to comply? And there was a certain degree in which it was very Girardian, basically. And I think if people want to hear more about this, I talked to some length in two broadcasts with the American scholar Thaddeus Kaczynski, who's hopefully got a forthcoming book about Catholics and the COVID pseudo pandemic. But he talks about how there was this incredible sense of the desire to self-justify, and it was this self-righteousness, which was procured via the sacrifice of material desires that these worldly secular people were willing to do during this COVID thing. And it was a certain sense in which, and Matthias de Smet has talked about this, a social bond was procured through those sacrifices. So anyway, all of this has just been, knocking around in my mind recently when I've been considering what is the religion of people. And you're quite right to say people like Zoomers don't have such a poor, not even residual Christianity, but even a kind of religious literacy at all with regard to the basic lineaments or tenets of the Christian faith. I in my line of work, I gave a Christmas card. By the way, Christmas cards are a great form of evangelization, which everyone should be doing. Micro evangelization. So I obviously give. I was giving a Christmas card to a client of mine, and their young child opened this Christmas card, which was an Italian painting of the Madonna and Child, and this child was of indigenous English, background, and wasn't even a Zoomer. I guess they're on Generation Alpha now.
Can't you just say
And
English, or do you really have to say indigenous?
yeah, well, I mean, I say indigenous because because ethnically English, exactly.
Well, I would have
The
thought if you were in England and you weren't ethnically England, I guess I haven't really thought too much about this, but I would assume that you would say you were British if you were going to say anything, because you're not English because England's a culture, right? Or English is a culture and an
No,
ethnicity.
English is an ethnicity. British isn't an ethnicity.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, that's what I'm saying. So wouldn't they call themselves British, not English, if you know what I mean? So we wouldn't.
No, so the regime likes us to identify as Britons, as
Yeah.
British, because, as you know, Britain was a kind of Protestant Masonic creation where the four nations, the four ethnicities of English, Scots, Irish, Welsh were united under this British regime. And so what you find is that a lot of ethnic minorities call themselves British.
Yeah.
Because they don't call themselves English, and this is why, for example, the Cross of St. George is still deemed to be offensive by those on the revolutionary left, whereas they're more comfortable with the Union Jack, because the Britain is a kind of positivist man-made creation, whereas the gens Anglorum, the English people, are the English people that St. Bede wrote about, basically the Anglo-Saxons, Anglo-Saxons and Jutes. And so I make a point of describing myself as English, and I mean I see myself as British sort of secondarily, but
Sure.
of describing myself as English, because then that very much pinpoints who my people are, the gens Anglorum. So
So
yeah, this
sorry,
young
but
English.
what I was saying, sorry, my point was more just that wouldn't you be able to say? I'm saying you wouldn't need to say indigenous English because English is already an ethnicity that is, you know what I mean? Do you understand what I'm saying?
Yes, yeah, I
Okay,
certainly, yes.
sorry.
No, you're right. I mean, indigenous is something I say because in these globo homo times, they're so keen to emphasize the fact that there is such thing as indigenous Native Americans, there is such an indigenous Africans, indigenous Chinese, but they really balk when you talk about indigenous Europeans. So I say indigenous Europeans or indigenous English in this case as a kind of militant linguistic stake to just basically antagonize the enemy.
Ah,
So this young English boy, he I gave him this card and with our Blessed Mother and the Christ Child, and he said, "Why is there a baby on the front?" So this is an English boy who has absolutely no comprehension of what Christmas is actually about. I mean, it's just a little anecdote, but I think it serves to illustrate what you're saying about how these younger generations have no comprehension of the tenets, which the boomers and above did. They went to nativity plays. They had a basic understanding of our Lord's parables, the Sermon on the Mount, and his passion, death, and resurrection. They understood these kind of main parts of the Christian story. Whereas now I go somewhere like the National Gallery in central London, and you see all these bemused Chinese tourists and English people in immodest dress, kind of blundering around, and obviously all the visual, the figurative works of art are all about one story, by and large, especially in the medieval galleries and the Renaissance and 18th century and so on. They're Christian art, and you
yeah,
just see them looking all kind of bemused at these depictions of our Lord's baptism, or our Lord's temptation in the desert, and they're all about one story. And these Zoomers and millennials, and they just don't know what it like. Why were they so into this? Like,
yeah.
what's all this about? Like, what am I looking at? So and that wasn't by accident. That they are so ignorant of the tenets of Christianity. So yeah, in the census, you see the results of that cultural Marxist education starting to really bear its bitter fruits. Um, right
They
here,
they do bear bitter people too.
yeah, yeah,
Uh,
quite so. Yeah, it's very sad to see.
Were your
Um,
Zoomers during the sort of the lockdown periods, where did they conform to sort of the lockdown mentality pretty quickly, or not quickly, for a long time? Did they conform to that?
yeah, sadly and depressingly, so that was what was so shocking for me as well within that psychological warfare operation, was that it wasn't just the fact that the young, who are meant to have a kind of carefree spirit and can easily access within a few clicks the reality of the data about the virulence and danger of the SARS-CoV-2 virus, and about how they themselves are at no risk, and ultimately no state has the right to bar freedom of association and freedom of worship, and they're meant to be out socializing and so on.
Hmm.
And the fact that they would nevertheless comply um, was very disturbing, and I think it's partly the religious action that I was talking about recently,
Yeah.
but also it's this deep lethargy and this kind of late civilizational exhaustion that pervades the formerly Christian nations today.
It's just interesting because in America, I think that that wasn't as complete. The younger generation, the Zoomers specifically. I mean, especially the ones that weren't under like the thumb of, I don't know, parent or something. Still went about and did, basically whatever they wanted. Which isn't usually good anyways, but it's still, at least it's not as crushing of a spirit as being basically unsociable and being losing all functions basically, because that's what we're learning is through, even the younger kids just are so far behind in skills
Right.
because of the lockdowns. But yeah,
Yeah.
so it's just interesting how culture has become, instead of in some ways less hedonist driven but more religious driven, just in a different way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I don't know. There's so much to disentangle here because as man apostatizes from Christianity, Western man, and descends further and further towards anti-Christendom, um, we start to, well, we plumb deeper and deeper depths of sin, and we correspond more and more to the kind of lower hierarchy of hell. And so, you know, the debauched sort of 1970s kind of hedonism, um, it's even worse today if it's, a completely alone person self-abusing via online pornography. Like that's an even worse sin. So you can see how the fallen angels are just dragging our civilization further and further away from God.
I almost
And
don't think we even need demons at this point. I think the demons are sitting back watching, like, how did this happen? Like, they're almost amazed. I think they're maybe amazed at their own lack of need to work, if you know what I mean. Like, humans are doing this pretty much by themselves. It seems like it. I mean, there's definitely a demonic element to it, no doubt. But I do think it has a very strong, just human driven element.
yeah, yes, but I wouldn't underestimate the degree to which the powers and principalities, the dark powers, are orchestrating the events we see. But as you say, acting on human concupiscence, and being able to. A friend of mine mentioned how, in a certain sense, it shows how little backbone we have. That the way that
Yeah.
the sin that the demons have kind of got us on, in a certain sense, or a large number of people today, are the sins of the flesh, the deadly sin of lust, which is actually quite kind of low down. They haven't had to go higher to, avarice and, although obviously that's incredibly prevalent today, but pride, the kind of worst deadly sins. It's like very little effort, just with like lust. They've
Yeah.
caused
It
this apostasy.
it
But
does.
actually,
Yeah.
there's all those other sins are, of course, very widespread today. So going back to this religious composition graph,
Mhm.
obviously we talked about the rise of no religion there,
Yeah.
but obviously the other statistic that is really worth considering is the rise in the Mohammedan population.
Mhm.
Now, this is where I would really take their numbers with a pinch of salt. I remember reading about how in the 2011 census, the Mohammedan population of Cardiff was known by various figures, to do with the mosque attendance throughout the city, to be well over the 300,000 that were purported in the 2011 census. And that lower estimation was a result of various, illegal immigrants not declaring their household numbers, or people, engaging in social welfare avoidance, and various things like that. And people who knew the Mohammedan community in Cardiff well said that population was underestimated by, I can't remember, 20% or something like that. So,
Wow.
bear that in mind when you look at the statistics. Nevertheless, even with their official statistics, we've got a huge increase here. The Mohammedan population going from 3.9 million, 6.5 million. That's a 44% increase in that time. So hang on, I'm just checking my notes to check it. They make sure they correspond.
Yeah, it says.
Yeah, sorry, I was talking about percentage. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
So yeah, to have gone from
Yeah,
4.9%
4.9%.
to 6.5% to now stand at 3.9 million. To go up by 1.16 million is an increase of 44%, which is massive in 10 years. So that segment is definitely growing, and it's all part of this, this scourge that God is allowing for the apostate, formerly Christian nations. And Mohammedanism has always historically been a kind of scourge by which God allowed Christian nations to be punished. There was once upon a time there was a Christian North Africa and Christian Middle East,
Yeah.
which were just obliterated, just wiped out.
Yep.
And maybe that will be what happens to France, Germany, England as well. I don't know. But anyway, I think it is worth noting that the Mohammedan population, again, with people that I interact with in London, from what I see, what I observe, things I hear, the younger millennial and Zoomer Mohammedans are much less pious and much less observant of Mohammedan law.
Yep.
And so I would emphasize that there is no population that Western globo homo culture cannot corrupt.
Yeah, if
And I saw this
anything,
in the Middle East as well.
yeah.
I think that people who think that, oh, we're suddenly going to be overwhelmed with Mohammedan militancy and stuff. I'm sure that will be an element. We just have to look at the kind of Leicester clashes between Hindus and Mohammedans this year. But I think that's not
Where
going to be the whole story.
is that more? Is that often more a like Pakistani Indian battle between Hindus and Muslims, or is that a entirely purely religious conflict?
No, it's precisely so. Yeah. So it was
Yeah.
very disturbing, and it was a real portent of things to come, what we saw in Leicester earlier this year. So first of all, it's worth noting, again, with this census, Leicester, Luton and Birmingham are now greater than 50% black and minority ethnic. So those are no longer English cities anymore. They're
Yeah.
gone. So we talk about, a replacement or this kind of gaslighting that goes on from the regime media that, oh, we're not being replaced and we're not being conquered. There are 3 large cities in the country which have been lost.
That's what the Dutch said when they invaded England in 1688. They said, "Oh no, we're not invading you.
Yeah,
We just
and then
overthrew your king."
within 5 years we have a central bank
Yeah,
after the model of the Dutch central bank.
exactly.
So in Leicester we saw these clashes, and it's not just Mohammedan sort of egotism at play, but also Hindu egotism, because a lot of these Hindu groups have been funded by the kind of Hindu nationalist government of Narendra Modi in India, which has taken a much more kind of aggressive Hindu identitarian ideology and stance for the and spread that to the Indian diaspora around the world as well. So the once upon the English working class residents, natives of Leicester, are left scratching their heads, aghast to see these conflicts imported onto our streets. And I'm reminded of Rudyard Kipling's poem called The Stranger. I'm going to read a couple of verses. The stranger within my gate, he may be true or kind, but he does not talk my talk. I cannot feel his mind. I see the face and the eyes and the mouth, but not the soul behind. The men of my own stock, they may do ill or well, but they tell the lies I am wanted to. They are used to the lies I tell. And we do not need interpreters when we go to buy and sell. The stranger within my gates, he may be evil or good, but I cannot tell what powers control, what reasons sway his mood. nor when the gods of his far-off land shall repossess his blood. The men of my own stock, bitter bad they may be, but at least they hear the things I hear and see the things I see. And whatever I think of them and their likes, they think of the likes of me. This was my father's belief, and this is also mine, that let the corn be all one sheaf, and the grapes be all one vine, ere our children's teeth are set on edge by bitter bread and wine. So the part of that I think that's most apposite for this was when he says, I cannot tell what powers control, what reasons sway his mood, nor when the gods of his far-off land shall repossess his blood.
Yeah.
And fundamentally, these are foreign cultures, and we are oligarchic-controlled politicians, particularly under the Blair terror, have imported these people, and suddenly we've got the ethnic conflicts of the Indian subcontinent playing out on the former, on the streets of Leicester. It's totally bizarre, but it's, I think, important what's to come.
Yeah. Is Blair now seen more and more as the villain he was, or is that a slow build?
Yeah, he is very much reviled by both the left and the right, generally speaking, because the left see him as a war criminal for the Iraq War, quite understandably.
Mm-hmm.
And so he's tried several times to sort of worm his way back into the public square, but it's not really worked because of that public hatred. So yeah, he popped up again during the scamdemic and was very much pushing the injections and advocating for restrictions on the unjabbed and so on. So yeah, he's very much a figure that's, if you want the latest oligarch agenda, you just look at what Tony Blair is sort of talking about.
Gotcha. I also think that a lot of Americans have a hard time sort of understanding this this talk of other religions being and like other cultures coming in and being is sort of, I don't know, as important whether what someone's culture is, because most Americans think of America as an immigrant nation, and to some degree, that's correct. To some degree, it's correct on the in the realm of a lot of different Christian nations sent different peoples to North America, to the United States, and so there is this something of a culture or multicultural that had always been there, but it's nothing as drastic as different religions as well, mixing with different cultures and that sort of thing. And I think that's just easier to ignore, I think, from an American perspective, when you're I mean, I guess cities probably have to deal with this more, but cities are more liberal anyway, so they don't have any problem with different cultures coming in, and then they move out of the cities, and there's just plenty of space in the United States to find your little group anyways. But I think it's important to know is that England as itself is not just a nation, but it is also a people. So you can't take the people out of the nation and have the same nation.
Yeah, quite so, exactly. I mean, America is such an unusual Enlightenment proposition nation that it's really the exception rather than the rule.
Mm-hmm.
I've skirmished a number of times with Catholics and non-Catholics of a sort of ethno-nationalist, white identitarian persuasion, and so I very much make these comments in the sense of there being an identifiable gens anglorum and God desiring a diversity of nations.
Yeah.
But at the same time, recognizing that these are categories of nature, and that by becoming adopted sons of God through baptism, we are assumed into supernature through, as our partakers in the divine nature. And that is infinitely more important than our natural identities. As St. Paul says, there is, not Jew or Greek or Gentile, you're one in Christ. So by far and away, the most important thing with regard to the state of England is that it is Christian. Nevertheless, I think it's a question of culture, and I think it's a question of scale. So it's not about so it's about what is, where can there be assimilation. I think the true assimilation is marriage, because by marriage, man and woman become one flesh. And so a man that marries, I don't know, a French woman, she becomes English, in a true ontological sense, because she becomes one flesh with her husband.
Yeah.
And obviously we've seen that, that's what happened in the ages of faith, in the days of Christendom. There was a very cosmopolitan, pan-European culture, with bishops being installed in various sees across, and have a universal language of Latin, and
Where
because
it,
everyone shares the faith, everyone shares a supernatural identity which transcends the natural identity, but doesn't dissolve the natural identity, but sort of assumes it, perfects it. And so the discourse today is kind of split between nationalist, ethno-nationalists who are corrupted or are corrupted and influenced by a Darwinian modernism that prioritizes race science and ideas about inherent race qualities and things, which I'm sure there is, but fixates on it because they are naturalists, and so they see, if they do adhere to Catholicism, then often they see it as socially useful, as an expression of natural religion that is fitting for the European peoples, rather than first of all seeing it as the means by which souls are saved. And so that's where I think the errors arise, the errors abound. So on the one hand, then you have the leftist naturalists who want to dissolve all nations into this Tower of Babel, melange of all nations, which I don't think God wants either. So the whole discourse has been severely traduced, and very much operating within the categories of the city of man rather than the city of God.
Yeah, it's definitely a difficult sort of discussion to have, insofar as it's the language isn't very well or isn't easy to sort of explain uh, between sort of this ethno-nationalist uh, ideology and just wanting to preserve the culture of one's nation, as well as maintaining sort of uh, open or immigration that isn't overwhelming, but is sort of moderate immigration that is totally fine in any society. As you said, what for assimilation to happen, and not to mention, if if all the different cultures that were coming in were Christian cultures, or because there are plenty of Indian Christians, Indian Catholics, and there are plenty of Arab Catholics, and there are plenty of Asian Catholics. So if it was sort of uh, a much less of a cultural situation and more of just basically if everyone believed in God the same way, it would be a way less difficult situation.
Yeah, well, they wouldn't be driven to emigrate in the first place, most likely.
That's a good point too.
With some exceptions with regard to persecuted Christians in the Middle East, perhaps. But yeah, that's why I don't really engage too much in sort of policy discussions or what can we do about this, because in a certain sense,
Sure.
I think it's too late.
Okay.
That these questions are secondary, and that the situation is beyond human repair.
Hmm.
That the fundamental problem is man's retreat from grace, modernity's war on God, and so it's not a case of coming up with the right immigration policy or whatever. I mean, this is happening because of European man's apostasy, and that's where I would like to focus my efforts on,
Yeah,
trying to deal
definitely.
with, trying to remedy, playing whatever part I can,
Sure.
um,
That makes
and
sense.
God brings good out of it as well. There's a very in a certain sense, quite a vibrant Catholic community in places like London that's been driven by immigration. A lot of Polish, Filipino, African, American Catholics, Indian Catholics, people from all around the world. And we really do have a unity because, as I say, we've got a
Hmm.
supernatural um, identity that we are both adopted. We are all adopted sons of God, and we love the brotherhood. So this is just merely the background for kind of this escalating turmoil and the end of the nation state paradigm, and the transition to this globalist paradigm. And that's something I wanted to mention as well, that this kind of new Orwellian term has dropped recently, which the the regime media has been kind of memeing out there, this global majority term. So they no longer they're starting to sort of shift from talking about ethnic minorities to talking about all these non-white people as part of a global majority.
Hmm.
So they refer to Black, Asians, Brown, dual heritage as being part of the global South. Um, very much defined against the formerly Christian white nations predominantly. Um,
Interesting.
and so they are the 85% of the population, the global population. So they are the global majority. And I think what that again evinces is this transition into a globalist paradigm where you're not primarily a British subject of His Majesty the King, but you are a global citizen.
Hmm. So do you think so you think the nation is basically uh dead?
Yep, I think that happened a while ago. Actually, it's just being made. It's just being formalized. It's being
Okay.
revealed to the general public.
Gotcha. Yeah, that's interesting. I um it's kind of strange though because still Western uh powers are the ones controlling the sort of the globalist uh homosexual uh, sort of culture that is being exported to all these other countries that are quote unquote, as you're saying, the global majority.
Yes, I think. I mean, that's a whole nother discussion. The contemporary power structure. Um, who are the oligarchs? Who is at the top of the pyramid? Um, I think that it might not be so monolithic as some people think. I think there are factions. I think they are united in their hostility towards the church and towards the remains of Christian civilization. But I think there are all sorts of interests that are sort of jockeying for a position at the table.
Yeah. Why do you think, or is there a place where it divides the Christians into denomination? Is there a part of is that part of the census?
As part of the
I
census,
need.
I think it is. Yes, they keep, again, as I mentioned about the political economy of the census. They keep manipulating the various categories of the census, so it's never consistent each 10 years. But I don't know. I can check while we're speaking. But I think, I mean, obviously, what you're seeing there is the collapse of Anglicanism.
Okay, so
Um,
that,
the I think that the numbers for Catholics has has actually grown slightly or remained fairly constant. No, I don't know if it is in the census. Actually, I've just checked the website. However, I did see something recently. It was on church attendance, and quite recently, on any given Sunday, more Catholics will be attending church than Anglicans.
that's weird for an American to hear that.
Yeah. So, in a certain sense, um, if we are, to the extent that we have a Christian population, it's more the further to some extent, at least, is with the one true faith. Anglicanism as a heretical project of the fallen angels will probably come to an end in our lifetimes. I think Protestantism as a whole, these very persistent heresies.
What do you think? Like, will it end up just being the king's religion at the end of the day? Like Anglicanism, will that just be?
Well, my friend Dr. Alan Phimister has talked about how in some ways the Queen was the late Queen was the last believing Anglican, and that I'm not even sure whether the King himself believes. In fact, I would say he doesn't believe from things he said. So yes, Dr. Phimister pointed out how Anglicanism has functioned as a kind of palliative or a sort of balm to assuage the consciences of the British people as they steadily apostatize from Christianity. And so, if you look historically, what Dr. Plinio Correa de Oliveira calls slow gear or slow motion revolutions are much more effective than fast speed revolutions. What's been more effective at destroying the faith of the Christian peoples, the Anabaptists of Munster or the Anglican Church? The Anabaptists of Munster were these crazy far left Protestants, the far left of the Protestant Revolution, as Roberta de Mattei calls them,
Yeah.
who were practicing, this weird, non-baptizing, non-Trinitarian, free love, heretical cult in the 16th century, and they were crushed by the German princes. So I'm sure that particular operation of the fallen angels resulted in, lots of souls going to hell. But if you think of Anglicanism, which kind of maintains the appearances or many appearances of Catholicism while emptying it of its substance, how many millions of souls has that resulted in going to hell over the centuries and achieving the objectives of the evil one? So I think these slow motion revolutions are a lot more effective. But yeah, even they eventually run out of, because they're parasitic. Well, evil is a privation. Evil is parasitic, so it survives by consuming what's left of the true, the good, and the beautiful. What's left of Catholicism, and within Anglicanism, there isn't much left.
Yeah.
So it will eventually wither away.
It will just be interesting to see when the Parliament will do away with like the monarchical rules about having to be an Anglican and that sort of thing.
Yeah,
Um,
formally disestablish the Church of England. Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, where we will no longer be an Anglican integralist state, and we will be a grey and gay state, just like every other secular materialist apostate nation. Yeah, that would be a bad thing. As much as Anglicanism is false, it's much more preferable, from the point of view of the one true faith, for Britain to at least be, heretically Christian, but derivatively Christian, and our objective to be to convert the monarch, to convert the establishment to just once again return to being a Catholic integralist state. Whereas if it was constitutionally secular, that would be a disaster. But yes, I do suspect that will occur quite rapidly. The news about the coronation has been leaking out in the last few months, and it seems to be that they will be reducing the Christian elements of the coronation rite, and it may well be that the king forgoes the oath to defend and uphold the Protestant religion, and swears to defend faiths.
Okay, because I was
Instead,
slightly
which
surprised
would be a
when
big step in that direction.
I was surprised when it came out that, or he just um in the announcement of His Majesty the King's ascent, is it ascension or ascension? What is it? What is it when he became king? What is it called?
Yeah, his ascent to the throne.
Yeah, ascension to the throne. Uh, it's interesting because it still, all the language was very formal, and Charles Coulomb likes to read what it said about it, and it's very Christian uh, in its language. So it's I was very surprised that stayed that way, but I can see that that's probably not going to last.
Yeah, well, these things can only last if they reside in men's hearts,
Mm-hmm.
right? Which they don't today, by and large. And when we saw the king swear immediately in the Privy Council to uphold and defend, quote unquote, the one, I think it's called the one true religion of the Protestant religion in Scotland, that specific heretical oath, that has never been filmed before. So it was the king's decision to allow news cameras to see the convention, the convening of the Privy Council for the first time, which was where we saw that oath being made. Now, yeah, I mean that oath is obviously a false religion, but still shows some adherence to an objective truth, to an idea of an objective truth, a wrong idea. But I don't see that lasting, as you say, and we'll see with the coronation ceremony. There's been a lot of contradictory news being issued about whether it's going to be a reduced service. There's been kind of troubling news, but there's also been more positive news about that. So we'll see.
Yeah, it's interesting. Where are the most Catholic what are the most Catholic parts of England?
There aren't really geographically
Okay.
concentrated areas for the faith in England today, because I mean, well, there are, but we're dealing with small percentages here. So at most it will be, I don't know, maybe like 3 or 4% in certain areas. Historically, Lancashire was very much a sort of recusant county. I think even in the 18th century, it was about 20% Catholic, and it was seen as a Jacobite stronghold. And I've been to many villages in Lancashire where the village church is not an Anglican church; it's a Catholic church,
Really?
because the local nobility were Catholics. They were recusant families, and they supported the local village, the local village church being Catholic. It's also close to Ireland, so it benefited from Catholic immigration from Ireland. And so in some little pockets, the kind of normative culture, local culture, was Catholic on a very small scale. So that's historically so, but everything's post Vatican II today, so that those norms have dissipated. So now I would say one of the most Catholic areas would be somewhere like Ealing in London, which they call Warsaw on the Ganges, because it's Polish and Indian, and a lot of those Indians are from Goa. So you go to some of these incredibly diverse areas, places like Ealing, and for example, I pray outside an abortion mill in Ealing, and it was where there's been controversy over these buffer zones, and I remember receiving abuse from people while praying there, and then feeling quite demoralized, and suddenly we were doing it in a shift for 40 days for life, and this SUV turned up, and then these six large Polish men came out. It was like the cavalry had arrived, and suddenly we felt much more, with much more sort of fortified as a group, and that's because it's a very Polish area. So I would say those are the most Catholic areas in England, but they're not really Catholic English areas. They're Catholic areas.
That's quite a siege of Vienna, quite a new siege of Vienna, sieging out the abortion clinics.
Yeah,
the Polish cavalry.
I mean, it's such an important thing to do, but I really dislike doing it
Sure.
in personally speaking, in a certain sense. I mean, I always just seem to end up in getting in confrontations, and I've nearly got in fights a couple of times with physical fights with men there. So
yeah,
it's important that we do it.
now we've also seen politically things have changed religiously so far, that we have, or in England there's the first Hindu prime minister, Rishi Sunak. What is the background behind how this man became prime minister of, even if we get Christianity is the minority religion, but Hindu is nowhere near the majority religion.
Well, it is very symbolically fitting, isn't it? Because I think it's worth really underlining this, that he is Britain's first overtly pagan ruler in 1,336 years.
Wow.
You have to go back to the time of before St. Bede to find a pagan ruler. Now, I'm not saying that Churchill or Boris Johnson or Cameron or Blair or any of these creatures was a faithful Christian. Far from it. Nevertheless, they were baptized, and so at some point they had received sanctifying grace, and they had to at least give lip service to being vaguely some kind of Christian. And so the very fact that we've got now a Hindu prime minister, as you say, and it just, no one bats an eyelid that we've got a non-Christian, non-English ruler, is very, very fitting for the time, very much a sign of the times. But I also want to say, I think a lot of people have been very negative about Rishi Sunak, and it's easy to overemphasize the decline, but it's worth pointing out. It's important to note that he's actually an upgrade in a certain sense, because Liz Truss, or Liz O'Leary, our last unfortunate prime minister, was just a WEF puppet, but Rishi Sunak is a WEF stakeholder. So we've got an upgrade here. I don't know why people are complaining, but yeah, seriously, he is very much a prime minister for our times. As I say, we have left the nation state paradigm for the globalist technocratic paradigm. So it's very fitting that we have a globalist technocratic prime minister. And I think what's important to note about him is that he is easily the richest man in Parliament. The Sunday Times rich list named Sunak and his wife, will come on to her, Akshata Murty, these 222nd wealthiest people in the UK with an estimated combined wealth of £730 million. So, as I mentioned, he's very much a stakeholder within the regime, not just a puppet. I mean, he is a puppet, but he's also, I think, someone who actually benefits from their project to establish a new world order. He's an oligarch puppet, and he's been put in place to manage the next phase of the controlled demolition, the dissolution of Christian civilization. Now, you said Hinduism. What's it got to do with English patrimony? But in a certain sense, it's very well suited to globalism, because Hinduism is syncretistic, right? There's a sense, we're all one within Hinduism, and this is what Christian missionaries, the Portuguese missionaries in the subcontinent, found so difficult when they were trying to evangelize the Indian people. Obviously, they made exceptions with Goa and Kerala and places, but they're still they didn't really penetrate the subcontinent, because they would turn up in these Indian villages and say, "Hey, we've got this good news that God, in whom we live and move and have our being, has become man, and he's taken on our sins, and he's died so that we may become holy, and you need to be grafted onto his mystical body in order to have eternal life," and proclaiming the gospel. And the Indians would just look at them and go, "Yeah, well, Shiva became incarnate like 20 years ago." And they'll say, "Yeah, thank you. We'll have your statue of our Lord, and we'll just put that within our syncretist pantheon of gods, and we'll worship Jesus, but we'll also worship all these other gods as well." So there's something about the subcontinent which is evangelization has really struggled. E. Michael Jones talks about this with regard to India and how it's in a certain sense is a land without logos. So Rishi Sunak being a Hindu, I think, is quite apt for our times, because the Masonic powers obviously want a one world religion to go with the one world government, and they ultimately want this kind of chaplaincy to anti-Christendom, which is going to be this convergence of and syncretization of the world's great faiths. It's quite fitting. The regime media has focused its messaging since the win on the fact that he's the UK's first prime minister of colour. That's been the headline, obviously, in the New York Times, Washington Post, the BBC, the Guardian. Your own President Biden even hailed this groundbreaking milestone in his congratulatory message to Sunak. So there's this emphasis on how he's so different from all the previous prime ministers, and absolutely no discussion about the ways in which he's very much the same.
Yeah.
They gleefully talk about this, his minority in terms of what he looks like, the least important thing, but ignore the fact that he's a member of this much smaller minority, the 0.1%. So unless you want to come in on anything there, Connor, I can talk a little bit about his wife, Akshata Murty, and what I think this tells us about his background.
Well, we can do this part either before or after, whichever way you think is best. But the sort of the politicians, the laymen that supported either Truss or the past these past politicians, but especially like people like Jacob Rees-Mogg, like people that seemingly should be less or should be Catholic, or say that they're Catholic. Where do these people fall into this situation?
Well, there are a handful of backbench MPs. I assume, obviously, you know what the term backbench means.
I do, yeah.
So kept away from the ministerial positions,
Yep.
who are either purport to be practicing Catholics or are at least more traditional high Tories, practicing Anglicans, pro-life, against the woke agenda, against globo homo. They want to at least slow down this decay. Just a handful. And Jacob Rees-Mogg, you could say, is one of those, although recently he's attained front bench positions in the government, and he's become a lot less forthright, which has been very disappointing to see. A lot of Catholics, English Catholics, had high hopes for Jacob Rees-Mogg, and now that's been largely shattered. I think I hold him in very little regard, to be honest. I think that his behavior during the COVID pseudo pandemic demonstrated that he was happy to go along with the entire tyranny without any kind of opposition for the sake of his career. And he voted consistently for the lockdowns and voted to deprive care workers of their jobs if they didn't receive the abortion-derived injection at that time. There are many other MPs who are much better than him on it.
Mm-hmm.
And I also can disclose that he attended the Brompton Oratory during the lockdowns illegally to frequent the sacraments, which I know for a fact, and is the height of hypocrisy, quite frankly, that he voted to shut down the churches, which the bishops were very much initiated themselves as well. But nevertheless, yeah, he's a great disappointment.
Gotcha.
So those right-wing Tories were much more supportive of Liz O'Leary and her kind of neo-Thatcherite, supposedly neo-Thatcherite policy agenda. And Sunak is very much more from the left wing of the party. So what gets called the One Nation tradition, it's much more aptly called the One World globalist group. So yeah, I think Rees-Mogg is no longer in the government now, and he's kind of sidelined some of those figures.
Is he much? I would think if I was him, or if I was in something like a position of his, it would be at least understandable that when you get into power, that you might have to be shut up. It's a lot much more, just because my understanding is if you're a member of the government or a member of the, I don't know what the correct words are, like a minister of the government, you have to toe the government's line, right?
Yeah, that's right. That's a constitutional convention. It's called collective cabinet responsibility.
Yeah.
And so by that, if you have to publicly support and defend government policy, because we're not actually meant to have this presidential system where the prime minister just decides everything. It's meant to be a cabinet system, which is constitutionally speaking the advice given to the sovereign. So, and the prime minister is just prime minister. He's just first lord of the treasury. But in de facto terms, we've actually got this presidential system.
Yeah.
But yes, we have collective cabinet responsibility. So the convention is that if a minister disagrees with a government policy, then they resign. But that's no excuse for Rees-Mogg, because he was bound by collective cabinet responsibility. So he should have denounced the COVID tyranny, the attack on our constitution, the attack on of our freedom of religion, the attack on on civil society that it represented, the horror of the injection coercion and everything else, and then resigned.
Yeah. Okay.
So
Yeah.
I have
That makes sense.
absolutely no patience or understanding or anything for these characters. The time is far gone now for compromise. We need men of Catholic iron who are going to stand up and denounce these deeply evil and malign powers.
Yeah,
Simple as that.
I agree wholeheartedly. I just know people are extremely weak.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah. Well, yeah, and the oligarchs have their methods for maintaining that control. Principally, I would say blackmail. So there's blackmail and bribery. So there's a political economy of corruption. That's a whole nother thing we can get into. But basically, I think that they involve, they get people involved in perversions and all sorts of other things, so that they have compromats over them, which they can get them to do their bidding. And there's a video clip, if anyone wants to look, of Boris Johnson in Israel joking about getting up to things on his trip there, and Mossad having compromat material behind his escapades. Why is it that Boris suddenly came out and changed his position on lockdowns within the space of a week, and then supposedly got COVID and was on death's door, and came back and was like a shell of his former self? I think that he was roughed up. He was given a warning there to go along with the globalist Judeo-Masonic agenda, and he complied from then on. But
yeah,
what we
I'm
are desperately in
surprised.
need of is someone to break ranks, possibly as Vigano did. I'm not too sure, but in a sort of Vigano-ish way, and just lay it all out there and say, publish and be damned. Okay, maybe I did commit this sin, but we believe in forgiveness, and I am going to undo their power by revealing this methodology of control that they have. And the public are waking up to are kind of sensing this more and more now, with the revelations of the Epstein affair and the Dutroux affair and the Franklin scandals and all these horrific episodes that are more widely known now.
Are there any lords that to be looked up to in English culture?
There are one or two who are in the sort of high Tory tradition, who have spoken out against the attacks on our constitution. Lord Sumption, who you could call a law lord before Blair destroyed that part of the constitution, an eminent legal authority, was a pretty strong voice against the lockdown tyranny, credit where it's due. Also an historian of the 100 Years' War, a medievalist. There are one or two others who have talked about, denounced the ongoing attacks on the English constitution. But by and large, many of them are decadent and just frittering away their fortune and neglecting their social responsibility, their noblesse oblige, in indulging in hedonistic pursuits in their country piles. It's very sad. They should be leading us. They should be fighting back against this. Um, but one of the disturbing things that has come up about the coronation next year is that the peers of the realm will be invited to not wear their coronation robes and coronets, but to instead wear lounge suits.
Lame.
Which is just another little chipping away at the importance of the nobility, of the peerage of the realm within the English Constitution, because that attire and the coronet reminds the wearer, that they, in a certain sense, participate in that authority of the king, and that with that authority comes responsibilities.
Yeah.
And so they
It's
can't just live a life of debauchery, that actually they have to stand up to defend the commons. That's what the nobility are for, part, as among other functions. And so, yeah, these are all but the ways by which this decline continues.
Yeah, it's slightly comical because fiction gets much like sort of goes through all these different or greater interest in nobility and kingship and stuff like that, as well as crowns and um, uniforms that show, or a sort of garb that show responsibility and that sort of thing in different ways. Sometimes it's a inversion of it, but there's still much more interest. People are much more interested in uh, those symbols of leadership, of lordship, of nobility, of royalty, yet they somehow decide that, oh no, they don't want to see that, the people don't want to actually see that in real life, even though they want to see it in fiction. That doesn't make any sense to me.
Yeah, well, of course, it's actually the revolutionary forces deciding that. It's not the
Hmm.
people who have clamoured against um, the peers of the realm wearing their ceremonial attire. In a certain sense, I think I was listening to a podcast recently. He was talking about how there's no such thing as public opinion; that everything is elite discourse. And
Elite
I
opinion.
think there's a truth to that. There is such thing as public opinion, but the societies are hierarchical, and they are led by an elite. And what we have is
Hmm.
a shadow elite. And what the nobility were a Christian elite, very much a formalized, open elite who you can hold accountable. And just as we were saying how there's no such thing as no religion, there's no such thing as an egalitarian society. There's no such thing as a society without an elite, right? Soviet
Hmm.
Russia had its nomenclatura, had its chosen party elite, who had all their privileges and stuff. We have an elite, a nobility. We have a noblesse malice, right? A malicious nobility, who are the celebrities. And so people, rather than imitating Christian aristocrats, instead imitate or look to for leadership George Clooney, or Justin Bieber, or Andrew Tate, or take your pick. But the fact is, we are mimetic creatures, and we imitate those that we see, that we deem to have a greater degree of perfection than ourselves.
Yeah, indeed. Yeah, that's I think that's a great place to end this conversation. And I think I've learned a lot about the situation in England. It's one of those things that personally, as an American, I have a great interest, but you're providing sort of the knowledge, the sort of, because we can always look at the BBC, or I think it's LBC is
The
another. It's like
Bolshevik Broadcasting Corporation.
yeah, exactly. We can always look at what the media is telling us about what's going on in politics or culture and that sort of thing. But we're never going to, we don't get a full picture or the truth, most likely, from those uh places. So you're able to give Americans especially a fuller understanding of what's going on not just surrounding them, but surrounding the world and on a sort of global level. So thank you for that.
A pleasure. Yeah, thank you. It's great to discuss with you, Connor. And deep politics
Hmm.
is one of my principal areas of interest. So I'm happy to speak again in future with you on some of these topics.
Awesome. So, do you have any episodes, new episodes that you want to tell us about that are going to be coming out from Vonday Radio in the near future?
Yes, I'm organising currently a part 2 for my discussion with Mark Barnes and Jason Craig about guilds. The first episode focused on the establishment of the guilds and then their apogee in Christendom. We'd explored some of their social, religious, economic functions. And so we've got some more of that to examine. And then I want to look at their dissolution. And then we're going to look at their restoration. So ending on a hopeful note there. But I think we traditional Catholics, now that we're starting to see, as you know, we've obviously had for continuously, we have the formation of families, even though there's all sorts of problems there, but nevertheless, people are forming families, faithful families. I think we now need to start thinking about the next, degree of human association after that. And start thinking about things like guilds, communities, all these different Catholic institutions to form, something of a parallel institutions, parallel economies. So that's an area I'm very interested in, and planning a few other podcasts in this vein, actually, with regard to what can be done at the moment. And I want to really expand Vendée Radio's output. It's just a question of getting the time, but I'd eventually like to really, create certain, what's the word, like themes with my videos, whether it's Catholic history, whether it's deep political analysis, whether it's looking at solutions, these different areas. So just please subscribe and look out for future content.
Awesome. I mean, I love your content. It's uh always very exciting when I see a new episode from you. So keep up the good work. Thank you for your work.
Thanks very much, Connor. I'll
Yeah.
see you soon.
Yeah, have a good one, everyone. Please go to Vendée Radio, and if you like what I'm doing here at Plotlines, please like, share, comment, and subscribe. And also join our Discord. That there will be a link in the description to that if you want to continue the conversation off YouTube. So please do that and have a blessed Christmas season. Bye.
Merry Christmas.